Hello, I'm Rachel from Douentza Garden in Ireland, and this video is all about how to manage your perennials in summer. It's about which plants can be cut back to the ground after flowering and how to do it. Very often a plant can look great when in flower, but once those blooms fade, it starts to go rapidly downhill, producing very few flowers and displaying yellow or brown foliage. Even with careful deadheading, it still looks bad. Well, if a plant starts to look that in June or July, that's when the summer cutback comes into play. So let's get on with the video. You are very welcome to this video all about managing your perennials in summer, and specifically about cutting back certain ones after flowering. Now, if you're new to the channel, you should know that I garden in what roughly equates to as hardiness zone 9. I'm in Southern Ireland and we don't use that system over here, but in terms of hardiness, just take zone 9 as a rough guide. Any resources or sites, websites that I mention in the video, I'm going to link them down below in the video description, so do check there afterwards. This video, I suppose, is for gardeners who've already mastered the art of deadheading, which is very simply removing spent flowers so that the plant will keep on producing more and more. I have made several videos about deadheading and, well, you know, I'll link to those at the very end of this one. But there is a group of perennials that require more radical treatment in summer to keep them looking good, and these are the ones that I'm talking about today. I remember way back when I started out in gardening, how all these various cutbacks were a little bit confusing. So on the one hand, you have the autumn or spring cutback of perennials, which is, I suppose, a bit obvious. When you come into your garden in spring and see all that dead foliage on top, the obvious thing is to just cut it off and let the plants get going. Then I was also aware of a technique known as the Chelsea chop, which is something that's carried out in May, and it's something that you do before the plant flowers to delay flowering, and also for certain plants to allow them to grow strong and just hold themselves upright more without staking. Then there was this third category of summer cutback, and it just seemed to me, how could these poor plants take so much cutting back all in the one season? But we are talking about a specific group of plants that are very robust and respond well to this kind of treatment. There's also the fact that certain plants, like bulbs, well, these are ones that need their leaves. They need their leaves to help feed the bulb and make flowers for next year. And these are ones that should not be cut back at all after flowering. So all of that information is just kind of a jumble and a juggle in many people's heads. And we're going to unpick it now by having a look specifically at the plants, the specific list of plants that can be cut back in summer. So just a really brief recap. We're not talking about trees today like oak or birch. We're not talking about bushes like mock orange or Douentza. We're not talking about subshrubs like Santolina or lavender. We're not talking about bulbs or annuals. We're talking about a specific list of perennial plants that respond well to a radical cutback in summer. The next question is, when do you carry out this radical cutback of perennials? And the answer is June or July, but depending on the weather and depending on the specific plant. Now, in wet summers like we had this year, and oh my goodness, it certainly was wet, then on the bright side, perennials have kind of lasted longer, and you mightn't be looking at doing your cutback until well into July. On another year where it's been hotter, that same plant might need to be cut back in June. Now, different plants will have different schedules. Different ones flower slightly earlier, slightly later. You'll need to check regularly to see how your plants are doing and to decide whether it's time to cut back or not. Right, let's take a moment now and go over and have a look at that astrantia over there and see what we're going to do with it. This is astrantia, or Hattie's pincushion, and it's on my list of plants for the radical summer cutback. I will show you my complete list in just a minute. Now I'm looking at this plant and I need to ask myself two questions. The first question to ask is, have the flowers faded? If the plant's still looking good, there's no need to cut it back because we certainly don't want to cut off flowers. In this case, we have no flowers and the plant is looking particularly past its best. It's time to cut it back. The next question is, does the plant have new growth? And for this, you'll need to go right in, right down at the base and have a look at what's happening down there. If there is new growth at the base of the plant, then don't cut that off. Cut just above the new growth. So I've decided this astrantia needs to be cut back, and I'm going to do it by just taking a clump of the stems and cutting back right at the base, cutting off stems, cutting off leaves, cutting off everything, leaving perhaps an inch up from the ground. The secateurs I'm using today is from the Pink Lady Tools range. It's the satin gold bypass secateurs, and I like it because it's ergonomically designed to fit small to medium-sized hands. It has a Japanese steel blade and non-slip handles with padding. The padding is a great feature and makes it very nice to hold. There are 5 advantages to cutting back perennials in summer. The first is that cutting back gets rid of yellow, tired foliage in the border. Now this is important. You don't want your July garden to look like autumn. Secondly, by cutting back, you leave room for surrounding plants to strut their stuff and be seen better. A third advantage is that certain plants, like Aqualegias for example, or even this astrantia, they're terrible seeders, and by getting rid of the seed, you save yourself a lot of weeding later on. Of course, if you want seed, leave about 3 stems uncut. The fourth and biggest advantage of the summer cutback is that it will create a new flush of fresh foliage, making your borders look vibrant. And finally, by cutting back, you may get a second flush of flowers. Now, my experience is that this is something you shouldn't hold your breath for. I usually don't get a second flush of flowers, but certain perennials like oriental poppies, delphiniums and even lupins are supposed to give a second flush. And now that the astrantia is all cut back, the next task is to give it a good watering and a good feed. And the watering is really important. The feeding, I guess, is also important. And what I'm using here is the tomato fertilizer by Ocean Leaves, which I have been using for a while and find really good. And now I'm going to deal with the rest of this border, and that will involve a variety of cutting back, like we've just done, deadheading, and also light trimming, which is necessary for some perennials like bush salvias. So let's get on with it. And while I do this, here's my list of perennials that can be cut back in summer in the way described in this video. They are oriental poppies, Papaver orientalis, delphiniums, primroses or primula, lupins or lupinus, common globeflower or Trollius, columbines or granny's bonnet, aquilegia, lady's mantle or alchemilla mollis, Hattie's pincushion or astrantia, which we're dealing with today, hardy geraniums, and catmint or nepeta. You should note that this is not a complete list. There are other perennials out there that can be treated in this way. For example, for years I grew the tall campanula, Pritchard's variety, and when it finished flowering it was very tall and tended to flop about. I started cutting it to the ground after flowering, and it made such a big difference to my management of the border because I didn't have to stake anymore. The campanula tolerated the cutting back treatment very well. I've also heard from people who cut back daylilies or hemerocallis after flowering, and the plants seem to tolerate that well too. And even just this year I learnt about Persicaria red dragon, which can be cut back, and I've done it for the first time. Here we have a plant of red dragon that hasn't been cut back, and here we have the one that I cut back a few weeks ago, already beginning to spring into growth. So the lesson here is to experiment. Do note, however, that evergreen perennials such as heucheras or Virginia shouldn't be candidates for the summer cutback. But if a certain other perennial looks shabby after flowering, check first to see if it's on the list. And if it's not, try doing some research. Normally the sites I'd check out are the UK RHS website, which is excellent for most things. The US gardenia.net and the Spruce are also very good. But I can tell you that you'll struggle to find information even on these excellent sites about which perennials can be cut back in summer. Mostly sites will just recommend deadheading. So talk to other gardeners and see if you can find out about whether or not your particular perennial can be cut back after flowering. If this fails, try an experiment. Cut back just a portion of your plant and leave the rest and see what happens. See if it regrows. And in the interest of helping each other, I'd really be interested to hear from you if you know of perennials not on my list that can be cut back in summer. Please do let me know in the comments below, and let's try to get a complete list going on here. Now, I don't want to hear about plants that can be deadheaded or ones that can be lightly trimmed. I want to know about perennials that can be cut to the ground in summer and do well. And here are 3 exceptions and additional notes on this cutting back process. Seedling plants or newly planted perennials should not be cut back in this way. You want their energy to go into producing roots, not top growth. Also, in very hot summers, it may be wise to give your plants a break and not cut them back at all to reduce stress. Finally, you should try not to place plants that need cutting back at the same time together in the border, because it will leave a big gap. The idea is to have smaller gaps that can be overhung a little by other plants, making the gaps less obvious. Okay, I'm going to stop here because actually I think it's going to rain. It's much darker and I don't want to get the camera wet. But what I've done is, you can see what I've taken off the border. So a wheelbarrow and 4 trugs of cut back perennials or deadheaded perennials, and half a trug of weeds, and that was mostly from pulling the grass at the edge of the border and just giving the whole surface a bit of a scrape, because when you have your borders tightly planted like this, you don't get a lot of weeds in summer, which is just great. So I guess we have come to the end of this video. Let's put that down, it was heavy, about cutting back in summer. and I hope you will find it useful. I hope if you're checking in at a later date, you're going to check the comments down below for other suggestions by people of perennials they've learnt can be cut back in summer, in addition to the list that I've already given you. I will link at the very end as well to a couple of videos on the same theme. So there'll be a couple on deadheading, and also one I made a good while ago about the July cutback to get rid of browns in the border. It's an old video, but it's still very relevant, so check those out if you like. Thank you as always for watching, and next Sunday there's going to be the July garden tour of Douentza Garden, my garden, and you're going to see this border hopefully with the rest of it weeded. So I got that far just there, and when you see next week's video you'll see this border again. So anyway, that's it. Yeah, nothing left to say except thanks for watching, and see you on the next video. Bye.